Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the grand hall of the Zenithari Imperial Court, observing the formal session with the practiced eye of a cultural anthropologist 8 months into her assignment. The hall was magnificent, vast crystalline architecture that seemed to capture and refract light in ways that created constantly shifting patterns, ceremonial banners representing centuries of Zenithari history, and hundreds of courtiers arranged in precise hierarchical positions that communicated status through spatial relationships alone. Elena was here as part of a diplomatic exchange program, assigned to study Zenithari social structures and serve as a cultural liaison between humanity and the Zenithari Empire. The Zenithari were an ancient and powerful civilization, humanoid with distinctive long ears adorned with jewelry and ornaments that denoted lineage and status, naturally elegant in movement, with a rigid hierarchical culture built on tradition, duty, and carefully maintained protocol. Queen Tavris sat on the throne at the hall's center, the absolute ruler of an empire spanning dozens of star systems. She was exactly what Elena had expected from the briefing materials. Controlled, formal, precise in every word and gesture. Tall even by Zenithari standards, with silver hair elaborately styled and ears adorned with the royal ornaments that marked her supreme authority, she radiated power and perfect composure. Elena had come to realize over 8 months of observation and interaction that Tavris was also profoundly lonely. It was visible in small moments, the way her expression shifted when formal sessions ended, and she was alone with just essential staff, the careful distance she maintained from everyone, the fact that all her relationships were defined by duty and hierarchy rather than genuine connection. Elena's role brought her into regular contact with the Queen. Cultural exchange required discussion, explanation, teaching each other about their respective civilizations. What had started as formal meetings had gradually become something more comfortable, conversations that extended beyond strict necessity, moments of genuine exchange rather than just diplomatic protocol. Elena had learned that Tavris was brilliant, carrying enormous responsibility with grace while privately struggling with isolation that came with absolute power. Tavris had no one she could simply talk to without the weight of authority creating distance. Everyone who interacted with her did so through the lens of her position. She was queen first, person second always. Except gradually with Elena. Elena didn't need anything from Tavris politically. She wasn't seeking favor or advancement in Zenithari hierarchy. She was just a human trying to understand an alien culture, and their conversations had slowly shifted from purely academic to something more personal. They discussed philosophy, art, the differences between human and Zenithari perspectives on community and individuality. They shared meals occasionally, informal working dinners that stretched longer than necessary, because both found the conversation engaging. Tavris had begun to relax slightly around Elena in ways she didn't with her own advisors, small moments where the perfect royal composure slipped, and she was just a person rather than a living embodiment of imperial authority. Today's formal session was proceeding normally, various nobles presenting matters, Tavris responding with perfect precision, when something unexpected happened. A senior advisor, Lord Kelvin, stepped forward to present a formal proposal regarding the Queen's marriage. Among the Zenithari, royal marriage was political arrangement made for the good of the empire. Tavris had been unmarried for 5 years since her previous consort died in an accident, and there was increasing pressure from traditionalists for her to select a new consort to ensure succession and maintain proper protocol. Lord Kelvin presented 3 candidates, all Zenithari nobles of appropriate rank and lineage, all representing politically advantageous alliances, all carefully vetted for suitability according to traditional criteria. The presentation was formal, practical, treating marriage as the political transaction it was in Zenithari culture. Each candidate was described in terms of family connections, territorial holdings, political influence. No mention of compatibility or personal preference, because those factors were considered irrelevant to royal marriages. Tavris listened with her usual composure, examining the documentation with apparent careful consideration, asking appropriate questions about each candidate's qualifications and political connections. To everyone watching, she appeared to be seriously considering the proposal according to proper protocol. Then she did something completely unprecedented. She set down the documents, rose from her throne with deliberate grace, and walked directly toward where Elena was seated at the side of the hall in the observers section. The entire court went silent. This was not protocol. Queens didn't abandon formal proceedings to approach observers. Every eye in the hall fixed on Tavris with varying degrees of shock and confusion. "Dr. Vasquez," Tavris said, and her voice carried through the silent hall with unusual gentleness. "May I speak honestly?" "Of course, Your Majesty," Elena said, completely confused about what was happening and acutely aware that hundreds of Zenithari courtiers were staring at them. Tavris turned to face her court, and when she spoke, her voice carried emotion that Elena had never heard in public settings: vulnerability, longing, something raw and genuine that shattered her usual perfect control. "I have listened to this proposal regarding my marriage, and I find I cannot proceed with formal consideration without first speaking a truth that I have kept silent for months." She extended her hand toward Elena, not a command but an offering, a gesture inviting choice rather than demanding obedience. "I would do anything to make her happy," Tavris said, and the court erupted in shocked whispers. "I wish she were my wife." The silence that crashed down after those words was absolute and profound. "Not for political advantage or dynastic necessity," Tavris continued, her voice steady despite the emotion it carried, "but because in 8 months of knowing Dr. Vasquez, I have found something I thought impossible for someone in my position: genuine companionship, true understanding, someone who sees me as Tavris rather than just as queen, someone who speaks to me as an equal, who challenges my assumptions, who makes me laugh in private moments." She was still holding out her hand, still looking at Elena with an expression of such open vulnerability and affection that it was shocking from someone usually so perfectly controlled. "I wish I could choose her," Tavris said, "regardless of protocol or political calculation, or the fact that she is human and I am Zenithari. I wish I had the freedom to choose partnership based on genuine connection rather than strategic advantage. I wish I could simply extend my hand and have her take it, and build a life together based on what we feel rather than what is politically expected." The court was in barely controlled chaos now, nobles whispering urgently to each other, advisors looking horrified, protocol officers clearly having no idea what procedure existed for this situation. Tavris raised her voice slightly to be heard over the commotion. "I know my duty. I know that queens do not marry for love or personal preference. I know that my choice of consort must be politically advantageous and culturally appropriate according to centuries of tradition. But I also know that I am tired," she continued, and her voice carried weariness that spoke of years of isolation. "Tired of pretending that duty and protocol are sufficient substitutes for genuine connection. Tired of maintaining perfect composure while privately wishing for someone who sees me as a person rather than a crown. Tired of accepting that my personal happiness is irrelevant to my role." She looked at Elena with such open affection that Elena felt her chest tighten with emotion. "For 8 months, Dr. Vasquez has shown me what it means to be valued as a person rather than a position. She has asked nothing of me, sought no favor, simply offered companionship and understanding. And I find that I wish, desperately, impossibly, that I had the freedom to choose her as my partner. Not because it would be strategically wise, but because she makes me happy in ways I had forgotten were possible." The court was still frozen in shock, processing this unprecedented display of personal vulnerability from their normally perfectly controlled queen. Tavris took a visible breath, steadying herself. I understand that this changes nothing in practical terms. I understand my duty to the empire and the political necessities of royal marriage. But I needed to speak this truth before proceeding with any formal consideration of the candidates Lord Kelvin has presented. Dr. Vasquez deserves to know how much she means to me, even if circumstances prevent me from acting on those feelings. She finally lowered her extended hand, though her eyes remained fixed on Elena. I apologize for placing you in this awkward position, Tavris said, her voice softer now. I know this is politically complicated and personally uncomfortable. But I could not continue pretending that selecting a consort is merely a political transaction when my heart argues otherwise. You deserved honesty, even if that honesty cannot lead anywhere. Elena sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The queen of the Zenithari Empire had just confessed, before her entire court, before hundreds of witnesses, that she wished she could marry a human cultural anthropologist. Not as a political strategy, not as a command or expectation, but as honest expression of feeling she knew violated every protocol and tradition. Lord Kelvin stepped forward, clearly trying to restore some kind of order to the situation. Your Majesty, perhaps this conversation would be better conducted in private. No, Tavris said firmly, turning to face him. I have spent my entire reign conducting everything privately, maintaining perfect protocol, never allowing personal feeling to interfere with duty or tradition. For once in my life, I am being honest about what I want rather than simply accepting what is expected of me. She addressed the entire court now, her voice carrying the authority of absolute rule, even as the content was personally vulnerable. I know this is unprecedented. I know it violates protocol and creates political complications. But I am also aware that I have the power to choose differently than tradition dictates if I am willing to accept the consequences. And before I proceed with selecting a consort based purely on political calculation, I needed to acknowledge that there is someone I wish I could choose based on something more meaningful. The rest of the court session was quietly abandoned. Clearly no one could focus on normal business after what had just happened. Elena was gently escorted back to her quarters by a protocol officer who looked like he had no idea how to handle this situation, leaving her alone to process the magnitude of what Tavris had just done. The queen had confessed love before her entire court, and in doing so had risked everything. The immediate political reaction was intense and divided. Over the following days, Elena watched from her quarters as the Zenithari court fractured into various factions responding to the queen's unprecedented confession. Some courtiers viewed it as touching display of honesty from a monarch known for perfect control, a reminder that even absolute rulers are human, or Zenithari, with genuine emotions and desires that sometimes conflict with duty. Others saw it as dangerous breach of protocol that undermined royal authority. If the queen could allow personal feelings to interfere with political necessity, what did that say about her fitness to rule? The fact that Tavris had expressed romantic interest in a human rather than a Zenithari created additional complications. Some saw it as beautiful symbol of the growing alliance between their peoples. Others saw it as cultural betrayal. The queen should prefer her own kind, should value Zenithari traditions enough to choose appropriately. Tavris's senior advisors were clearly trying to manage the fallout. Elena saw them moving through the court, having quiet conversations, attempting to frame the confession in ways that minimized damage to the queen's authority. But Tavris herself made no effort to walk back her statement. She appeared at official functions maintaining her usual composure, but she made no apology for what she'd said, no claim that it had been momentary emotion or poor judgment. 3 days after the confession, Elena received a private message from Tavris, not through official channels, but delivered personally by a trusted servant. Dr. Vasquez, I do not regret speaking honestly, though I deeply regret the difficult position it has placed you in. You deserve to know that my feelings are genuine and profound, regardless of whether circumstances allow them to lead anywhere. You have given me the gift of being seen as a person rather than just a crown. I wish to honor that by being honest about what you mean to me. I ask nothing of you in return. You owe me nothing. But I could not let political calculation silence a truth that has defined my private thoughts for months. With deepest respect and affection, Tavris. Elena read the message 3 times, trying to process the careful formality that couldn't quite hide the genuine emotion beneath. She'd known Tavris valued their friendship. She'd suspected there might be deeper feelings developing, small moments of lingering eye contact, the way Tavris's expression softened when they were alone, the fact that their conversations had grown increasingly personal. But she hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected the Queen to risk her political standing and relationship with her court to make such a public declaration. Elena spent days thinking, processing, trying to understand what she actually felt beyond the shock and political complexity. She realized something that both excited and terrified her. She felt the same way. 8 months of gradually growing closer to Tavris had created something she hadn't anticipated when she'd accepted this cultural exchange assignment. She'd come to deeply care about this brilliant, lonely queen who carried impossible responsibilities with grace while privately wishing for genuine connection. The question was what to do about it. A week after the confession, Elena requested a private audience with Tavris. They met in the Queen's private study, the same room where they'd had countless conversations over the past months, where Tavris had always been most herself rather than most royal. The room was elegant but comfortable, filled with books and research materials, decorated with art from dozens of cultures including several human pieces that Tavris had acquired specifically, because Elena had mentioned appreciating that style. Tavris rose when Elena entered, her expression carefully controlled but her eyes showing nervousness that Elena had rarely seen. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for agreeing to meet. I know the past week has been difficult." "Please call me Elena," she interrupted gently. "At least here in private can we dispense with formality." "Elena," Tavris repeated, and something in her expression softened. "I owe you an apology. What I said in court, I should have spoken to you privately first, should have given you warning rather than making such a public declaration that placed you in an impossible position." "Why can't they?" Elena interrupted. Tavris blinked in confusion. "Why can't what? Why can't your feelings lead anywhere practical? You said that in your message, that circumstances prevent them from leading anywhere. But Tavris, you're the Queen. You make the laws, you define what's required. If you want to choose differently, who can actually stop you?" Tavris stared at her for a long moment. "Elena, I cannot ask you to upend your entire life, to stay in a culture that isn't yours, to accept the enormous scrutiny and pressure that would come with being consort to a Zenithari queen. You're not asking. I'm offering." The words hung in the air between them. "These past 8 months have been the most intellectually and emotionally engaging of my life," Elena continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I came here to study Zenithari culture as an anthropologist. Instead I found you, someone brilliant and isolated, doing her best to carry impossible responsibilities with grace while privately struggling with loneliness that comes with absolute power." She moved closer to Tavris. "Someone who has slowly become one of the most important people in my life. When you extended your hand in that throne room, you were offering choice rather than commanding. I'm making mine now. If you genuinely want this, if you're willing to challenge protocol and tradition and political expectation, then I'm willing to try. I'm willing to navigate the cultural differences and deal with the political complications and figure out what it means to be partner to a queen who rules an empire. Because what I've found with you is worth fighting for." Tavris looked at her with an expression that mixed hope and disbelief. "Elena, you cannot possibly understand the full magnitude of what you would be accepting. The constant scrutiny, the political pressure, the fact that many of my people would judge you constantly for not being Zenithari, for being an outsider who doesn't fully understand our traditions. I've been studying your culture intensively for 8 months, Elena pointed out. I'm not naive about the challenges, but I also know what I've found with you: genuine connection, intellectual partnership, someone who makes me want to be better. That's worth fighting for. This would change everything, Tavris said, her voice carrying awe and fear in equal measure. For both of us. My reign, your career, the relationship between our peoples, centuries of tradition. Yes, Elena agreed simply. But you said you wished you had the freedom to choose me. I'm telling you that you do. You're the queen. You have more freedom than almost anyone in the galaxy if you're willing to use it. The question is whether you're willing to fight for what you want rather than just accepting what's expected. Tavris crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and took Elena's hands, the gesture she'd made in the throne room. But this time, Elena accepted it, intertwining their fingers. I would do anything to make you happy, Tavris said, and her voice carried absolute conviction that made Elena's breath catch. I meant that when I said it, and I mean it now. If you are truly offering to try this despite all the complications and challenges, then I will fight for it. I will challenge every protocol and tradition that stands in our way. I will make this work because losing you, now that I know you're willing, is completely unacceptable. Then we're doing this, Elena said, feeling certainty settle over her. We're actually doing this. We are, Tavris confirmed, and for the first time since Elena had known her, the queen smiled with absolutely unguarded joy. And I suspect it will be the most difficult thing either of us has ever attempted. But Elena, the thought of choosing happiness over mere duty, of fighting for what I genuinely want rather than simply accepting what tradition dictates, that is worth any difficulty. She pulled Elena closer, their faces inches apart. I have spent my entire reign being what others needed me to be. For once, I am choosing what I need, and what I need is you. Then you have me, Elena said. For whatever comes next, you have me. When they kissed, it felt like the beginning of something that would change both their lives and possibly the relationship between 2 civilizations. But in that moment, neither of them cared about the political implications. They cared only about finally choosing what they wanted rather than what was expected. The announcement came 2 days later, delivered through official channels with all the formal gravity such pronouncements required. Queen Tavris declared her intention to formalize a partnership bond with Dr. Elena Vasquez of Earth, acknowledging this as unprecedented but defending it as her sovereign choice and right. The political reaction was immediate, intense, and deeply divided. 3 senior advisors resigned in protest within hours of the announcement, stating they could not serve a queen who would so flagrantly disregard tradition and cultural appropriateness in favor of personal preference. A faction of traditionalist nobles formally objected, filing legal challenges citing centuries of precedent establishing that royal consorts must be Zenithari of appropriate rank and lineage. They argued that allowing a human, an outsider who couldn't possibly understand the full weight of Zenithari traditions, To occupy such an intimate position of influence violated the cultural foundations of the empire. But there was also unexpected support. Younger nobles and progressive factions praised it as bold demonstration of the queen's authority and willingness to prioritize genuine partnership over empty political calculation. They argued that Tavris's honesty about her feelings showed strength rather than weakness, and that her choice to fight for what she wanted would ultimately make her a more effective rather than less effective ruler. The human government was cautiously supportive, but clearly concerned about the political implications. This could either strengthen human-Zenithari relations significantly or create complications, depending on how the Zenithari court ultimately responded. Over the following months, Tavris fought for her choice with determination that shocked those accustomed to her careful adherence to protocol and tradition. She met individually with every noble who'd filed formal objections, listening to their concerns and explaining her reasoning with patient precision. She didn't dismiss their worries about tradition and cultural continuity. She acknowledged them honestly while making clear that her decision was not negotiable. "I understand your concerns about precedent," Tavris told Lord Corvin, one of the most vocal objectors, during a private meeting that Elena was permitted to observe. "I understand that allowing a non-Zenithari consort creates questions about tradition and cultural preservation, but I ask you to consider what effective rule actually requires. For 5 years, I have ruled alone, maintaining perfect protocol while privately struggling with isolation that made every decision harder rather than easier. Dr. Vasquez has shown me that genuine partnership, someone who challenges me intellectually, supports me emotionally, reminds me why I serve my people rather than just governing them, makes me more effective, not less. Strategic marriages create political alliances," she continued, "but they do not create the kind of deep partnership that helps a ruler make better decisions, maintain perspective under pressure, or remember that governing is ultimately about serving people's well-being rather than just maintaining power structures." Lord Corvin was not convinced, but he left the meeting looking thoughtful rather than simply opposed. Tavris worked with legal scholars to establish precedent for cross-species royal partnerships, finding historical examples of Zenithari rulers who'd made unconventional choices, and using them to build legal framework for her decision. She addressed her people directly through multiple public forums, explaining her reasoning in ways designed to help them understand rather than just demanding they accept. "I have spent my entire reign prioritizing duty over personal happiness," Tavris told an assembled crowd during one such address, broadcast throughout the empire. "I have made every decision based on what I believed was best for our people, never considering what might be best for me personally. And that has made me an effective administrator but an isolated individual, powerful in position, but lonely in practice. Dr. Vasquez has shown me that those two things, duty and personal happiness, are not always opposed. That having genuine partnership based on mutual understanding and deep connection makes me better at serving you, not worse. Someone who challenges my thinking, supports me through difficult decisions, reminds me that ruling is ultimately about people's well-being rather than just maintaining traditional structures." The response was mixed. Some were moved by her honesty. Others remained skeptical that a human could truly understand Zenithari culture deeply enough to be appropriate royal consort. Elena, for her part, threw herself into learning everything she could about Zenithari traditions, history, and cultural nuances. She'd been studying for 8 months already, but now she intensified her efforts, determined to prove she could understand and respect Zenithari culture even if she wasn't born into it. She also faced her own challenges from the human side. Some colleagues questioned whether she was abandoning her career and cultural identity for a romantic relationship. Others worried she was being manipulated or overwhelmed by the power differential inherent in being courted by an absolute monarch. "I'm not abandoning anything," Elena told her mentor during a video call back to Earth. I'm choosing to build something unprecedented. Yes, there's risk. Yes, it's complicated. But Professor, I've found something genuine with Tavris, partnership that matters beyond political calculation. That's worth fighting for. The formal partnership ceremony was scheduled for 6 months after the initial announcement, giving time for legal frameworks to be established and for both Zenithari and human communities to adjust to the idea. Those 6 months were intense. Tavris faced continuous political pressure, legal challenges, and cultural criticism. Elena dealt with scrutiny from both species, questions about her motivations and fitness for such a role. But through it all, they had each other. Private moments in Tavris's study became refuge from the political storms. Quiet dinners where they could just be two people rather than queen and controversial partner. Conversations that ranged from serious discussion of the challenges they faced to lighter moments of shared humor and genuine affection. Do you regret it? Elena asked one evening, about 4 months into the fight. All the political complications, the advisors who resigned, the nobles who oppose you. Not for a single moment, Tavris said without hesitation. Fighting for you, for us, is the first time in my entire reign I've fought for something purely because I wanted it rather than because duty demanded it. That feels more genuine than anything else I've done as queen. What about you? Tavris asked. Do you regret accepting this impossible situation? No, Elena said, though I'll admit the scrutiny is more intense than I anticipated. But being with you, building something real despite all the obstacles, that's worth every difficult moment. As the ceremony date approached, preparations became increasingly complex. It would blend Zenithari traditions with human elements, creating something new that acknowledged both cultures while establishing precedent for future cross-species partnerships. Some nobles announced they would boycott in protest. Others committed to attending out of loyalty to the queen even if they disagreed with her choice. Many committed to attending because they were genuinely moved by their queen choosing love and partnership over mere political convenience. The night before the ceremony, Tavris and Elena sat together in the observatory garden, looking out at the stars that represented the empire Tavris ruled and the distant Earth that Elena had come from. Tomorrow, everything changes, Tavris said quietly. Tomorrow, we make official what's already real, Elena corrected. The partnership, the choice to fight for what we want, that's already happened. Tomorrow is just acknowledgement. I love you, Tavris said, and despite months of growing closer, it was the first time she'd said it quite so directly. I want you to know that before tomorrow's ceremony. Whatever happens politically, whatever complications arise, I love you and that won't change. I love you too, Elena replied. And tomorrow we prove that even queens can choose happiness and become better rulers for it. The formal partnership ceremony happened on a clear morning 6 months after Tavris's initial confession. The grand hall was transformed, decorated with both Zenithari ceremonial elements and human touches, creating visual representation of two cultures coming together to create something new. Several hundred attendees filled the hall, some supportive, some attending from duty, some boycotting in protest, leaving conspicuous empty spaces in the traditional seating arrangements. Representatives from Earth were present, including Elena's family who traveled across the galaxy to witness this unprecedented event. The human ambassador sat in a position of honor, looking both pleased at the diplomatic implications and slightly overwhelmed by the cultural significance. Elena wore both human formal attire and Zenithari ceremonial elements, a dress that combined human design with Zenithari fabrics and symbolic ornaments, representing the bridging of two cultures. Her ears were adorned with simple ornaments that Tavris had given her, marking her impending position while respecting that she wasn't born Zenithari. Tavris wore full royal regalia, elaborate robes that displayed her absolute authority, ear ornaments that marked her imperial status, every element traditionally appropriate for such a ceremony. But she'd added one non-traditional touch. Flowers that Elena had mentioned were traditional in human partnership ceremonies, woven into her hair in a style that was distinctly human. The ceremony began with traditional Zenithari elements, formal acknowledgments of lineage and authority, ritual phrases in the ancient dialect that established the legal framework for the partnership. Then came the personalized elements, vows that Tavris and Elena had written together, blending tradition with genuine expression of what they meant to each other. Tavris spoke first, her voice carrying through the hall with the authority of absolute rule, but also with unmistakable emotion. I stand before you today as Queen of the Zenithari Empire, but also as Tavris, a person who has struggled with loneliness despite being surrounded by thousands, who has maintained perfect protocol while privately wishing for genuine connection, who has prioritized duty over personal happiness for my entire reign. Dr. Elena Vasquez has shown me that those two things, duty and happiness, need not be opposed. That genuine partnership based on deep understanding and mutual respect makes me more effective as a ruler, not less. That being seen as a person, rather than just a crown, allows me to serve my people with greater wisdom and compassion. She turned to face Elena directly, her voice softening. I choose you. Not because duty requires it, not because political calculation suggests it, but because you make me happy. Because you see me as Tavris rather than just as queen. Because genuine partnership with you is worth more than any strategic alliance could ever provide. I choose love over mere duty, Tavris continued, her voice growing stronger. Not because duty is unimportant, but because love makes duty more meaningful. I will spend my life proving that choosing you was not abandonment of my responsibilities, but recognition that effective rule requires personal fulfillment and genuine partnership. Elena responded with her own vows, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. I stand before you today as a human in a Zenithari court, as an outsider choosing to become part of something I didn't grow up understanding. I won't pretend I fully comprehend every nuance of your culture, or that this will be simple. But I choose you, Tavris. I choose partnership with someone brilliant and brave enough to fight for happiness rather than simply accepting loneliness, because tradition suggests that's what queens must do. I choose to build something unprecedented, a partnership that bridges species and cultures, that proves love and duty can strengthen each other rather than being perpetually opposed. She reached out and took Tavris's hands, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had started everything. I choose you, Elena said. Not the queen, not the crown, not the political alliance or strategic advantage. I choose you, the person who extended her hand and offered genuine choice when she could have simply commanded. The person who values honesty over protocol, who fights for what she believes in, who has shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued. The formal elements concluded with traditional Zenithari legal binding, witnesses attesting to the partnership, official seals applied to documentation, all the procedural elements that made the partnership legally recognized. But the moment that mattered most was simpler. Tavris and Elena facing each other, hands joined, choosing each other before hundreds of witnesses from two civilizations. When they kissed to seal the partnership, some in attendance cheered. Others maintained disapproving silence. A few quietly left in protest. Tavris and Elena noticed none of it. In that moment, they were simply two people who'd chosen each other despite every obstacle, every tradition, every political complication. The reception afterward was complex. Some nobles offered genuine congratulations. Others maintained cool formality. A few made their disapproval clear through pointed absence or minimal participation. But there were also unexpected moments of support. Younger Zenithari approached Elena to thank her for proving that tradition could evolve. Human attendees expressed pride that one of their own had been chosen by an alien queen. Several cross-species couples who'd faced their own challenges offered solidarity and encouragement. Lord Kelvin, who'd presented the original marriage proposal that had sparked everything, approached Tavris during a quiet moment. "Your Majesty, I owe you an apology," he said formally. "When you rejected my carefully vetted candidates in favor of this unprecedented choice, I believed you were allowing personal preference to undermine your duty." "And now?" Tavris asked. "Now I have watched you fight for this partnership with more determination and strategic brilliance than you've shown for many political battles. I have seen Dr. Vasquez work tirelessly to understand our culture while maintaining her own identity. I have observed that you seem more present, more engaged with governance since making this choice." He paused. "I still have concerns about precedent and tradition, but I can no longer claim your choice was mere personal indulgence. You fought for this, and perhaps that fighting spirit is exactly what effective rule requires." It wasn't complete acceptance, but it was acknowledgement, and that mattered. The years that followed were complex. Some relationships with traditionalist factions remained strained. Legal frameworks for cross-species royal partnerships had to be continuously refined. Elena faced ongoing scrutiny and occasional prejudice from those who believed she could never truly understand Zenithari culture. But the human-Zenithari alliance deepened significantly. Tavris's willingness to prioritize genuine partnership over empty protocol inspired others, both Zenithari and human, to question rigid traditions that prevented meaningful connection. And Tavris herself became more effective rather than less. Having genuine partnership, someone who challenged her thinking and supported her decisions while maintaining their own perspective, made her a better ruler. 5 years after the partnership ceremony, a Zenithari historian approached Elena for an interview about the cultural impact of their unprecedented union. "Dr. Vasquez, do you believe your partnership with Queen Tavris has strengthened or complicated her reign?" "Both," Elena answered honestly. "It strained some relationships and challenged traditions that many held sacred. But it's also proven that queens, that leaders generally, don't have to choose between personal happiness and effective governance. That sometimes they strengthen each other." What would you say to those who still believe the queen should have chosen a traditional Zenithari consort? I'd say that traditions evolve when they need to. That the strongest cultures are those that can adapt while maintaining their core values. And that reducing partnership to political calculation ignores what actually helps leaders make good decisions. Genuine connection, honest feedback, someone who sees them as a person rather than just a position. The historian turned to Tavris, who'd been observing the interview. "Your Majesty, do you regret your choice, given the political complications it created?" "Not for a single moment," Tavris said firmly. "Choosing Elena, fighting for genuine partnership rather than accepting strategic convenience, has been the most important decision of my reign. Not because it was politically optimal, but because it was personally essential. And that personal fulfillment has made me better at everything else I do." "Love and duty aren't always opposed," Tavris continued. "Sometimes choosing love is the most important duty we can fulfill, duty to ourselves, to the people we care about, to the principle that effectiveness requires wholeness rather than just sacrifice." 10 years after the confession that shocked a court, Tavris and Elena's partnership had become part of Zenithari history, studied, debated, used as precedent for other unconventional choices. They'd proven that even a queen ruling the stars could choose happiness and become better for it. That fighting for genuine connection wasn't abandonment of duty, but recognition that effective service requires personal fulfillment. The alien queen who'd extended her hand and confessed impossible longing before her entire court. The human who'd accepted that hand and fought beside her to make the impossible real. The partnership they'd built, difficult, genuine,